Hey, what's up, BC? It's Steve again, and it's time for another country music update. So let's jump in and get started. First up in the background, if you saw a little while back, Billy Hearst sent me a copy of the test pressing of his, I believe this was his first album, 20th anniversary special edition of Small Town Fool. Billy's, of course, a member of the VC. I'll put a link to his channel below. And the artwork on this isn't actually one of the jackets. This is just a printout that he made of it. The jackets hadn't been pressed yet. But I'll put a link down below for his channel and where you can buy a copy of this if you like what you're hearing, which I'm sure you will, because I'm really digging the album so far. And also I'll link to Scott's channel. Again, he's the one that did the artwork for it, so a little plug for both of those guys. And I think these are coming out pretty soon. The test pressings sound amazing. Super clean. I can't find anything wrong with them. It sounds beautiful. And it's a great album. Great album. Support Billy. Again, I'll put a link down below. So let's kind of jump in. So first up, I have this album. I think I have multiple copies of this album. But I ran across this German pressing, so I had to grab this one. And what's cool about it is this also has the, I don't know if this was released in support of this concert or this tour, which is what it looks like, or if this was bought at the tour. But this is, It's Only Rock and Roll from Waylon Jennings, which is an amazing album. But it's also got this little sticker on here, this little hype sticker with all the German tour dates. And this is a German pressing, so I went ahead and grabbed it. But beginning to end, just a killer Waylon Jennings album, and one that I highly recommend picking up, as I do with pretty much all, even Waylon's later stuff that wasn't as good. There's still some great stuff on there, and it's still worth having. So this next one, I liked it in the situation that I heard it. And then when I actually grabbed the album, and I ended up finding it for like $10 at a thrift store, not a thrift store, at a antique mall, sealed. It just wasn't as good as it was in the moment that I heard it. But this is Nashville Outlaws, a country tribute to Motley Crue. And where I heard this was during Motley Crue's final tour. They hit Atlanta on both legs of the tour. In the first leg they played in Marietta, and then on the second leg, or maybe it was Alpharetta where they played, regardless. Yeah, it was Alpharetta where they played. And then on the second leg of the tour they played in downtown Atlanta. Well, I caught them on the first leg of the tour, and when we were leaving, this album had just come out, and we were flipping through the stations, and one of the stations was playing Motley Crue. And I really dug what I heard. It was covers. And they were playing this album in full, and I got to hear 3 or 4 songs from it. But you've got Rascal Flatts doing Kickstart My Heart, Florida Georgia Line, If I Die Tomorrow, Leanne Rimes, Smoking in the Boys' Room, Justin Moore and Vince Neil, Home Sweet Home, Cassidy Pope, The Animal in Me, Without You is Claire Bowen, I don't know who that is. Big and Rich doing Same Old Situation. Aaron Luce doing Afraid, which I heard on the radio. That's a killer song. Don't Go Away, Mad, Just Go Away is pretty good. Lauren Jenkins, Brantley Gilbert doing Girls, Girls, Girls. Dr. Feelgood, The Mavericks, which is good. The Cadillac 3, I don't know who they are, but they did Livewire. So Livewire, The Mavericks doing Dr. Feelgood, and then Brantley Gilbert doing Girls, Girls, Girls were the songs I heard. And then Gretchen Wilson doing Wild Side. And then it's finished off with Darius Rucker doing Time for Change. And I heard 3 or 4 of those songs and dug them, but then when I got the album, like I said, it just doesn't hold up. There's 3 or 4 really good songs on this album, and the rest are so-so. As a Motley Crue fan, I would have bought this anyway. It's got the little not for resale promo sticker on it. And then it's on this kind of cool vinyl. Oh, maybe it wasn't. It's just clear red. I remembered it having some black or something in it. But, I mean, if you see it for $10 and you're a Motley Crue fan and a country music fan, then grab it. It's still an enjoyable listen. Those 3 or 4 songs are really great. But as a whole, I would say it's hit or miss. I would say it's a miss. This next one is killer. I ran across this. This is one that I flipped through a bunch of times. It wasn't in the country music section. It was in the rock section. And I didn't catch what it was the first 3 or 4 times that I went. This was in the store for months before I finally bought it. And then it dawned on me who it was one day. It's Vince Gill and Paul Franklin. I'm a huge Vince Gill fan, and Paul Franklin's a genius. And it's called Bakersfield. And what it is them doing the Bakersfield sound. And it's kind of cool because for those of you that don't know, it breaks down what the Bakersfield sound is. And you've got a really nice chart. Oh, is this the chart? And it starts with the Playboys, Bill Woods and his Orange Blossom Playboys. Then you got Buck Owens and the Schoolhouse Playboys, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, the second iteration of the Buckaroos, and then Merle Haggard and the Stranglers. Now these guys were all intertwined quite a bit. Members of different bands. Members of the Playboys went on to do stuff with Buck Owens. Some of the Buck Owens guys did stuff with Merle Haggard, And it was just an amazing time for music. And what they did, unfortunately there's no Playboy songs on here, which kind of surprised me. But it goes back and forth between them doing Buck Owens songs and then Merle Haggard songs. And they just kill it. Really great album. If you're a fan of any of these guys that I just mentioned, or the Bakersfield sound as a whole, you're going to love this album. Yeah, it's just a black pressing. This was 2013 when this was released. And I don't know how I hadn't heard of it. And I shot a message to Billy to see if he had known about this album. He didn't know either. So there you go. You got Vince Gill right here, and then you got Paul Franklin on the pedal steel. Both amazing though. And then on the other side of the chart you've got the songs from each that they did, and a picture of the actual singles as they were originally released. So a nice little set here. I like the little chart that they did, and they break down each of the songs and stuff, and just a great little set. Next up, this here is one that can definitely be attributed to Billy. So I always hear people talking about Steve Earle, and somehow I never got into him. I know why I didn't get into him, but I had never really run across him. He's one of those guys I've always heard about. But when people talked about him, they always compared him to Springsteen. And I'm not a big Springsteen fan. That's not to say that Springsteen doesn't have songs that I like. He's got some songs that I absolutely love. But as a whole, collection-wise, I'm just not a big Springsteen fan. So I never even ventured into Steve Earle. I had heard that he had kind of a country twist. And Billy kept talking him up for as long as I've been talking to him. So 4 or 5 months ago, I went ahead and grabbed this. I found it for like $5. This is Steve Earle and the Dukes, Exit Zero. I picked it up for cheap and gave it a spin, and I really ended up digging it. I really liked about half the songs. Half I thought were awesome, half I thought were good, which to me is a win, all the way across the board. But I really ended up liking it. And then when I started looking at people talking or articles and stuff about Steve Earle, this is generally listed as one of his least popular albums among the Steve Earle fans. So it's got me really wanting to check out some of his other stuff, and I've got a couple more of his albums down there. This one's a gold stamp promo as well. It's kind of hard to see. I thought it was a white label promo, but it's not. Just a gold stamp. But still, I really ended up digging this. So thank you, Billy, for kind of giving me that last push that I needed to check out some Steve Earle. Next up, this is one of the few albums I think I'm still missing is 2 last albums from the early 90s that were released on vinyl. But this is his debut. An absolute classic album and one of my all-time favorites. Probably my favorite country singer of all time. This is Straight Country from George Strait. I think this was 81. when this one came out. I'm kind of blind. Yeah, 81. I can't remember if there were any huge hits off of this one. Honky Tonk Downstairs, Blame It on Mexico. But it was really his second album where he really started having the hits. Her Goodbye Hit Me in the Heart's a pretty good one. Great album, though. If you're a George Strait fan, just a must-have. And I don't know why that one was so hard to find. I mean, there's copies everywhere. I just never ran across them. Next up, we have one of the... This was a pretty important album. And there's a lot of amazing stuff on here just because of the people that were involved in this project. I think this is technically listed as a Nitty Gritty Dirt Band album, but it's really not. This is a compilation. This is kind of a mixing or a passing of the guard, but Nitty Gritty Dirt Band decided to get in all of their heroes from the 40s, 50s, and 60s and do a recording session of them, and this is what came out of it. And I've been looking for a clean copy of this for years, and they're impossible to run across. Everybody that gets these just plays the shit out of them, and they're always destroyed when I see them. And people still want 10, 15 bucks for them, which is crazy. But this is Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And it's really cool the way they did this. So everything on here was done in 1 or 2 takes, and they took the best takes. But what's cool is somebody also got the bright idea to hang a mic above all of these people, and they catch the banner and the discussion between them throughout the recording of this session. And it's really cool. And then a couple of years ago, there was a documentary done about the original Carter family that Johnny Cash was involved in, and they've got a lot of footage from these sessions back. And I think this was like 73, maybe 72 or 73. But rock influenced country was starting to become big, and Nitty Gritty Dirt Band kind of fell into that group. And a lot of the traditional 40s and 50s, even early 60s styles of country was starting to fade out. So they brought some of these guys in. So this thing's got Mother Mabel Carter, who was involved in all iterations of the Carter family. My favorite stuff from them is the early stuff with her, AP, and I can't remember what the other, I don't remember if it was his wife. I can't remember off the top of my head. But Mother Mabel Carter is famous for I don't remember what they called it. But she was kind of like Robert Johnson in that she played rhythm and lead on her guitar at the same time. Amazing singer, guitarist, and really important to country music. You got Earl Scruggs, Doc Watson, Roy Acuff, interesting, and Merle Travis. What was I going to say? It doesn't matter. Merle Travis, Jimmy Martin. Who else was on here? There were a couple others. I can't remember who else. Junior Husky. Regardless, just a killer collection. 3-album set. Amazing from beginning to end. I honestly think this is the best thing that Nitty Gritty Dirt Band ever did. But highly recommend checking that one out. Next up, speaking of the Bakersfield sound, just an absolute genius. Unfortunately, we just lost him recently. This is Merle Haggard and the Stranglers presents his 30th album. Now, technically, this was his 20th album. He counted up, his 20th studio album. He counted up all the stuff that he had done with other people, and then also live albums and stuff like that to get the 30. But it was his 20th studio album. This is one of his most underrated albums. I never hear anybody talking about this, but this is a phenomenal album from beginning to end. Hang on a sec. Let me switch sides on this. Sorry about that. I had to flip the record over. But as I was saying, this is one of those underrated albums that Merle Haggard put out. I think the biggest hit off of here was Old Man from the Mountain. Things Aren't Funny Anymore was another big hit. My favorite song on here, and one of my favorite Merle Haggard songs, is White Man Singing the Blues. Just an amazing album. And then Holding Things Together, the first song on the second side, Dwight Yoakam has done a couple times, and he was saying that was one of a super influential song to him. And you know, if you're familiar with Dwight Yoakam, he's a huge fan of the Bakersfield sound. Obviously, you know, he really goes for that Buck Owens sound, but he's also really hugely influenced by Merle Haggard. Beginning to end, though, this is a phenomenal album. This is almost all written by him. I think there's only 2 songs on here that are written by somebody else, and both of those are great songs too. But this is one I highly recommend picking up. This would probably be in my top 3 Merle Haggard albums right here, which is saying a lot. Just with, if you're familiar with his output, it's insane. Next up, speaking of best albums, this, in my opinion, is David Allan Coe's best album. From beginning to end, this is an absolute masterpiece. This is The Long-Haired Redneck. Love, 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 love this album. Every song on here just kills. Long-Haired Redneck, When She Got Me, Revenge, Texas Lullaby, Living on the Run is phenomenal. Family Reunion, Rock and Roll Holiday. Just this album is absolute genius. As you can tell right here, this is a promo copy. This is actually a white label promo. So I've now got 3 of his white label promos. There you go. Amazing album. If you're a fan of David Allan Coe, this is a must-have. There you go. Just killer. Next up, so this is one of those artists, I love his early stuff. His later stuff was hit or miss. He had some great songs, and that's the case with both of these. These are both good albums from beginning to end, but there are some great songs on here. Unfortunately, these were his last 2 albums in 81 and 82, I think. 82 and 83. And one was released shortly after he died. But, oh wait, what the heck? Some memories just won't die. That's funny. It's got the lead-off track is the same on both of these. I don't know why they did that. But it's also one of his biggest hits from later in his career. And usually I pass by his albums just because they're everywhere. I can buy them for $1 all the time. And I generally end up just finding stuff I want more. And these are, they're both UK pressings, which I don't run across. And they were $5, so I went ahead and grabbed them. But again, unfortunately, these were his last 2 albums, and one was released just a few months after he died. And unfortunately, it was his own fault he died. He was having heart attacks and just refused to go to the doctor. And from what I understand, they probably could have saved him had he gone. But first we've got Come Back to Me from Marty Robbins. And then, of course, Some Memories Just Won't Die. And the big hit here is Some Memories Just Won't Die, which was a huge, huge hit for him. Let's see. Praying for Rain was another big one. If Her Blue Eyes Don't Get You. I mean, so there were some great songs on both of these. They're just not as good as his earlier albums, in my opinion. Next up is a guy that I'm surprised I don't see more people in the VC. Not that there's a lot of us showing country music. I don't see more people talking about him, though, because he really was amazing. And it's Ricky Skaggs. And a lot of people don't realize he's been in the country music limelight since he was young. He was like 8 or 9. And he was performing with Flatt and Scruggs. And I think I read somewhere at like 10 or 11 years old, he tried to join the Grand Ole Opry, and they wouldn't let him because he was too young. But just an amazing musician, real big in bringing bluegrass to the forefront of popular music. And actually, Ricky Skaggs and Keith Whitley got their start together. Their first couple albums were Whitley and Skaggs, which you can find for really cheap. I just never find them in good condition, so I don't have them. But I'm also a big fan of Keith Whitley. But Ricky Skaggs is just amazing. And this one, just a great album from beginning to end. the title track, Don't Cheat in Our Hometown, was probably the biggest hit off of this album. He had a 3 or 4 album run where he was kind of lighting up the country music charts. But it's also got a Wound Time Can't Erase and Honey, which were both country music hits that charted pretty well. So I was really happy to run across this in good condition. And again, Ricky Skaggs, you run across this stuff for really cheap all the time. So if you find it in good condition, I recommend grabbing it. And by this point in his career, he was doing a good job of mixing the bluegrass with the early '80s sound. This was '83, I believe. Does it have the? Yeah, '83 when this came out. Good album though, definitely worth checking out. So here we have some of the early, just kind of in the 50s, these guys were monsters. And this is one of those bands that every one of you knows who they are based on their album Satan Is Real, which always shows up on the list of the craziest, the best, and the worst album covers of all time. But this is the Louvin Brothers. And this was part of it's called the Rounder series. And the Rounder series was a series of like 20 albums by different artists that were rebranded under this series. But these were early. This was like their 3rd or 4th album, and it was a self-titled album. But this is a 70s reissue of the 60s album. Or I'm sorry, the 50s album. And they would have gone on longer. Unfortunately, I think his name was Ira. So Ira, and their name isn't the Louvin Brothers either. It's like Louder Milk or something like that. I don't know where the Louvin came from, but they're the Louder Milk Brothers. But Ira died in like 64 or 65, and that ended their career. So the last album came out posthumously, and it was like 67. Which is why, a lot of the younger generation, my generation, didn't really hear about them. And without vinyl community and these lists showing those album covers, I probably would not know who the Louvin Brothers are. But they're phenomenal 50s and 60s country. If you're into that early Carter sound that dominated through the late 50s, then you're going to love this. And these guys were some of the ones that did it the best. And they are in the Country Music Hall of Fame. They were members of Grand Ole Opry. Amazing, though. Next up, a little bit more Waylon. This is Waylon and Jessi, Leather and Lace. If you're not familiar with Jessi, that's Jessi Colter, who was actually Waylon Jennings' wife. She was one of the few female artists to come out of the outlaw country scene. There were a couple others, but the main reason she was so big was because she was married to Waylon. I can't remember who she was married to before. She was married to another artist before too, but they got married in '69, and they stayed married until he died. And they were another one of those country music love stories, kind of like Johnny Cash and June Carter. He had been married a few times before, but once they got together, that was it. Kind of like Johnny and June. And they were super close like Johnny and June, too. I'd love to see somebody do a movie about these two. Being that they were married in '69, she's also the mother of Shooter Jennings. Which surprises me, because he did a lot of stuff with his dad in his dad's later years. His mom is still singing, and I would like to see him do something with her. I think that would be cool to see a Shooter and Jessi, or something along those lines. And maybe they haven't. I've just never run across it. But this is a really good album, and one I recommend picking up. A lot of really cool covers. You Can Never Tell, which is that song, C'est La Vie. Rainy Season, Wild Side of Life is great. I Believe You Can. What Happened to Blue Eyes. Just a killer album from beginning to end. And this is another one that you can find for relatively cheap, so definitely pick it up. And then last but not least, this album is phenomenal, with the exception of one song, but one I highly recommend grabbing. This is Jason Isbell, who I'm already a fan of, and the 400 unit. This is the Nashville sound. The 400 units is his band that he's had for years. He'll do an album, a solo album, Jason Isbell, and then he'll do one with 400 unit. He's kind of gone back and forth for years. His last two albums have been solo albums, But he's done stuff on those solo albums with members of the 400 unit. Phenomenal album, though. There's an album, what is it? Anxiety is one of the best songs he's ever written. Molotov, Hope on the High Road, Something to Love, Cumberland Gap. The only song on here I don't like, and it's a good song, I just don't get the premise of it. It's White Man's World. Yes, I get it. I understand that, the white man's world thing. But it gets into the whole white guilt thing, which I've never understood. And maybe it's because I just grew up in a mixed family, and I grew up in a mixed community. But I've just never got the white guilt, the whole white guilt trip that you see with guys from the far left. Outside of that, that's really my only critique of the album. The album is phenomenal and one I highly recommend picking up. Depressing is not the best, which is disappointing because his last few pressings have sounded beautiful. This one, there's just a lot of noise in the pressing. The mastering itself sounds good. The music is solid. The lyrics are phenomenal. Just some of the best stuff that he's written. Just a pressing quality issue. But I've still listened to it 3 or 4 times, so it hasn't bothered me enough that I haven't listened to it. But that's it, guys. I hope you dug the update. Tell me what you guys think. Thoughts on the albums that I showed. Thoughts on Mr. Billy Hearst playing in the background. Killer album. One that I highly recommend picking up. Again, I'll put a link down below where you can buy it. Take care, VC, and I'll see you soon.